Welcome to Purr Berkshire Humane Society's award-winning cable television show. My name is John Peralta. I'm the executive director and today's host. And today we have a very special guest, Lisa Corbett, who's the head instructor of our Berkshire Humane Society's Family Dog School. Welcome, Lisa.
Good morning, John.
Lisa, first question I got to ask, and I know we're talking about this off air a little bit. How long have you been working in training dogs?
Well, John, I believe the first day that I started working at the shelter was July 1st, 1986.
86. So the mid-'80s, I think we want to call it.
It's been a while.
And you've, it took a year or two before I think Family Dog School evolved. So you spent your first couple of years working directly within the shelter.
Yes, our first few years we were the MSPCA shelter, and we didn't offer classes until Berkshire Humane took over in the early 90s. And that was one of our goals, was to try to triage, for lack of a better word, dogs before they get to the shelter that maybe were having some basic behavioral issues and could be easily corrected if they had a little guidance and help. So that's when our first Family Dog School classes started.
Yep, it's, I think one of the things that we saw both early on, it was very easy to see, is the reasons dogs were coming in. And if we could do something to prevent that and keep them in their homes, it'd certainly make the shelter work much, much easier. We haven't advertised a lot about Family Dog School because we've only up to this last year or so have been able to offer minimal classes, but we've sort of grown in the amount of classes we've been able to offer. Why don't we first start off by telling the people about what classes and what type of classes or courses or seminars Family Dog School actually offers?
Well, our most popular is the Level 1 Manners class, which is for puppies aged 4 months and older, and there is no age cutoff, so we'll take an older 9, 10-year-old dog. And it is an 8-week course. It does all the basics, or introduces all the basics. So heeling on leash and leash manners are addressed, coming when called, an exercise that we call polite greetings, which is teaching the dog to sit for interactions and attention as opposed to jumping. We do a down and relax, which teaches the dog to go to its own spot, lay down and tune out, which is beneficial for most owners. And then we like to have some fun, so we incorporate some agility obstacles. That's to help build coordination and body awareness and confidence in the dog, but it also helps instill teamwork between the dog and the handler. So those are offered 2 different days throughout the entire year. Those classes do book up probably 4 weeks before they start. So you're right, we've never had to advertise. But we also are starting to offer some puppy classes on a regular basis. Before, I'd offer it sporadically throughout the year. And now we have what we call an open enrollment for puppy school, which is a little bit different to this area, but we find it to be beneficial for the most part.
Comparing someone that wants to compete in obedience compared to the classes that you're teaching, are you worried about the not so perfect sit, or are you worried about just making sure your dog sits or coming when called?
We're not as concerned about the show quality exercises. We're really geared towards pet owners who just want to enjoy their pet, maybe give their dog a little bit more freedom because it's been trained, that they can enjoy the walks instead of being pulled around town. If someone's interested in showing, though, we do have the background to at least help them get the basics down. And I look at it as you can train for perfection or you can train for not perfect behaviors, but the reality is it's just as easy to train correctly than it is to train for mistakes.
So if you're having issues with your dog, do you have to attend the class?
No, I mean, everybody's different, and I think the bottom line with training your dog, you need to do what works for you. So if your time is limited, or maybe your problem is a very specific problem, sometimes a phone call is all that we need to do, or a couple emails back and forth. So I do counsel owners over the phone, and obviously there's no charge to that. Sometimes it's just a one visit. We can get them back on track, give them some of the information that they need, and then they can always touch base with me later on if they have other problems.
Okay. Beside the obvious, what's the difference between private and group lessons?
Well, I think that's the big part of it, is it can be geared more specifically towards the owner and the dog and what they're dealing with as far as the problem. The nice thing with the group settings, I think, though, is the continuity of the training week after week, the camaraderie with the other students, knowing that you're not alone. You've got all the same problems that a lot of other owners have. So I think it's more of a personal choice based on time and basically what the problems are that need to be addressed.
So if you have someone that's having an issue, their dog, let's say, is having issues getting along with other dogs,
that would obviously need to be addressed in privates to start, and depending on the severity of the problem and how much headway we can make. They may end up joining a group class as the end result goal, but it may not be obtainable depending on the dog and the situation.
Size of your classes, assistants, what do you normally?
We're lucky. We can do 8 dogs comfortably during the summer months because we go outside and do a lot of our walking activities outdoors, which is beneficial too. During the winter months, I do keep the classes a little bit smaller. We go down to about 6 students, sometimes 7, and there's always at least myself and one other assistant instructor, and occasionally there's actually 2 other individuals there. So everybody's getting, you know, I hope to say that they are all getting some individual attention and never feel like they're lost in a group class.
So if they want to move on, they're coming to your basic manners classes and they do level 1. Let's say they get to level 2 and they're really doing well, want to continue. Is there something else that we offer that they can might have some interest in?
After level 2, if somebody goes on and they want to just start to do other activities, that's when we gear them towards agility. If they're interested in that, it's a very active sport. It obviously has a lot of teamwork components to it. Yeah. The dogs have a lot of fun, so it's a great exercise outlet for many dogs who maybe don't get a lot during the week and during the day because their owners are very busy. Another option that we're pursuing is what we call a nose work class. And myself and another assistant instructor have been doing some trial runs with some elected students that have been coming to us for classes. And the whole idea behind nose work is completely different than most of your other classes. Take, for instance, agility. It's based on speed, precision, you know, control. The handler is in charge of the whole interactions. In nose work, it's the exact opposite. It's going to be calm concentration that gets the dog the reward at the end of the search. And it helps some of these dogs that are really pumped up or frightened even, just teaches them to calm down, relax, and concentrate. It's also one of the first times that the human has to take the follower position instead of the leadership position.
In the back seat.
Yeah, you got to let the dog do his job. And that's where, again, the teamwork can actually get better or improve. Even with an agility competitor, an obedience competitor, they're seeing this nose work class really help them overall with everything.
What type of containers do you use for that?
Well, depending on the dog, we start off with boxes, and we start to add more boxes to increase the difficulty of the search. Then, as we increase the difficulty with more boxes, then the hidden item might be placed inside a box, which is inside a box. We might put that on a surface, so the dog has to go up and into something to find the coveted reward. So the whole idea is these sequentially get more intense. Eventually the searches would go outside, and then we can even implement car searches as well.
Wow. The next topic I want to talk a few minutes about too is equipment, really walking equipment and control equipment. And that's really changed since the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
And I think what we used to have options of buckle collars, training collars, or choke collars, some people referred them to, yeah. And then into prong collars, right?
Yes.
And today, there's a whole wide variety of other choices out there. And I know we have a special guest, Duncan here with us today.
My tester dog.
He's going to do a little bit of modeling as well. Can you explain if someone's having issues and needs something maybe a little bit more than a buckle collar?
Sure.
What options are out there, and what's the pros and cons of each?
Well, like you said, John, traditional style training from back in the 80s and before that, we did rely on correctional-based methods. So if the dog did something unwanted, we would often apply pressure on the leash. That leash pressure would activate the training collar, as you said, so the dog would get this little popping. And over time, you know, we've learned so much in the last 25 years about training. One, we found that training collars can do damage to the trachea. It takes a lot of skill on the handler's part. And as training has evolved, we've really gotten away from correctional-based training. We've learned so much about dogs and the dynamics of learning that we're getting away from this type of equipment, and even your prong collars that you see a lot of these days put on every dog that pulls. What we're looking at these days is a little bit more humane methods of teaching leash manners and gaining more control. So real quick, dogs have what we call an opposition reflex. So I know you're looking at me funny, but this reflex in a dog, when they feel pressure on their collar, when they're on a leash, actually tells and causes the dog to pull harder, and it also can raise their level of arousal or stimulation. So you might be out on a walk, your dog sees another dog, he goes forward and pulls, and now he's barking and lunging because of this reflex. So the cool thing is the company and the individual that developed this pink harness here, this is called a front clip harness. And the leash traditionally would come from harnesses on the back.
Yes.
But if you look at their pulling power, the leash is attached behind the center of gravity, behind the pulling power. So although it might not hurt the dog's trachea, you often have a dog who's more powerful and more difficult to handle. So these smart individuals came up with a harness that the leash attaches on the front of the chest. And what it's meant to do is teach the dog to back away from pressure and rebalance their body to carry themselves more evenly so that they're not pulling. So it's a tool. I don't want to give anybody the impression that you put it on and it's magic, although sometimes we've seen that. And then the nice thing is you don't have to worry about the trachea. The dogs adjust to these more readily, meaning we can put these on. A lot of individuals go right out for a walk and start healing right as soon as we start.
What are some of the brand names for those?
We use the Easy Walk front clip, but you've got the Sensation, you've got the Sensible, and there's actually several more on the market now as well. So
But the key word is front clip.
front clip. Yep, the leash is going to come from the front of the chest, guys, to control the dog's movement and action. Now, the other equipment that we've used a lot of, and these have been around much longer. These have been around for about 30 years plus. And these are head collars. Head collars are similar to how we control a horse. We can walk a horse, and basically, as long as we have control over the head, the body follows. Same idea with a head collar. We can control the dog's body by controlling the head and muzzle. These are fantastic for hardcore pullers, maybe an owner who has some physical limitations, even if you just have a large breed and it's just too strong for you to manage, even on a front clip harness. These work fabulously, but we do have to acclimate the dog to wearing them, so we often have to go through some adjustment periods because they've never felt anything around the muzzle. I brought some others too, John,
Yes.
if that's okay.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at
The
it.
Halti is another brand of a head collar.
So the one that Duncan's wearing is a...
This is a gentle leader.
That's a
This is
gentle
what we
leader.
use at the shelter.
Yep.
The Halti is also another company that you'll see out in the pet shops and stuff. And I brought this one because this is fairly new. It's only been on the market, I don't know, maybe a couple years at best. This is the Nutrix. Now, I mentioned the opposition reflex. This looks a little bit daunting right now, but the company that developed this head collar is using a method with pressure behind the ears. Instead of the leash coming here, the leash is going to come from behind, and it applies pressure in the back. And it's meant to oppose that reflex as well. So this is a newer company, a newer head collar. Looks a little daunting, but
It does look daunting.
It's effective once we get it on.
You'd have to take a class just to
learn how to
Speaking
put
of
it on.
that, when someone comes to your class, is this equipment included if they don't have
Yes.
it, or?
Our level 1 basic manners, we include the training equipment. They'll have a choice of either one of these. They get that as part of their tuition. And honestly, John, if somebody starts off with one and they come back after a week or two and they say it's not effective, I'm really struggling, we're gonna switch it out. We want the options that we offer to be effective for the owner. We don't want to tell you what's going to work. We need to make sure it is working.
So you and your staff help pick which
Well,
piece
help
of
guide them
equipment.
through, and then teach them how to use it, and then obviously always be that support system if it's not working.
Okay. And also you brought along lots of different enrichment toys.
I did.
And we have seen lots of changes through the years. From the original Kong, I think that's been around forever.
Yeah.
Now there's many, many more choices out there. And can you touch base on, why enrichment toys are good, when or why people should use them?
Absolutely. It is a newer trend. It's something, like you said, the Kongs have been around for 20, 30 years since you and I have been working with dogs. And I know that people are into the stuffing of the Kongs. We're really pushing people to really think of these as food dispensing toys. Going back to the nose work, your dog
Yep.
is a hunter, he's a predator. They spend a lot of time sitting around the house, they spend a lot of time potentially in crates because they're being trained and still not trustworthy. What we want to do is try to entice the dog to interact and play, but in that process they're trying to work and get access to the food that we've left. So instead of something that might last a couple minutes, we're looking at 20 to 30 minutes.
Mental stimulation.
Mental stimulation, something that they have to hunt for their food instead of just get it in a bowl and it's done in 30 seconds. Through this hunting process, you'll get relaxation, but you'll also get a dog who's toy crazy, and that's what we want. So the Kong is one. Everybody thinks, peanut butter. We're talking, take the kibble, moisten the kibble, create a mush, mash that in there, put a carrot in there, put some canned food of your dog's dry, variety in there. If they get good at this, now you can start freezing it. It's going to take even longer for them to gain access.
And we do a lot of that at the shelter.
A lot of this at the shelter. There's a gentleman named Dr. Ian Dunbar. I think you saw him speak many years ago. He believes strongly that it's a waste of time to feed a dog out of a dog bowl. He really thinks this is the way to go. If you're going to feed your dog, which of course you are, they should be working and having an enrichment toy.
Now we'll go back to maybe a little bit of history here. Owners should be present when things like this are being done? Because we do know that you had a dog that had an experience with one of these.
Oh, it wasn't a Kong. It was a
Kong?
ball.
It
But
was a
yeah,
ball,
we did
yes.
have a student who had a problem. Any toy that you offer that you're going to stuff and put any food product in, it has to have, in this case, a second hole in it.
So the
Otherwise,
suction.
it creates a vacuum and a suction. And we've had what John's referring to as my first dog, who was a Rottweiler, had a ball that had a hole in it, one hole. And unfortunately, her tongue got sucked into the ball during the time that she was playing with it. And it was only after hours of seeing her walking around and drooling did I realize, wow, she wasn't putting that ball down because she couldn't.
Yeah.
And off to the emergency
Zero.
room. So check your toys. I mean, obviously, anything that gets chewed up, this is a used one from the shelter, you know, you want to watch that they're not chewing the rubber. And once it's damaged, you may want to replace it and not continue to feed it out. But this is one variety. The Kong company in the last couple years came out with a wobbler. Us folks that are a little older remember Weebles wobbles, and they don't fall down. Same idea. It's got a weighted base. You'd fill it with your dog's kibble. Just screw your base back on. Sometimes we have to get on the floor and help the dog, engage the dog in the toy, but the idea is as they bat and hit it around, their kibble falls out. So it takes a little bit longer. Buster cubes have been around for a long time too, and it's the same idea. You drop your kibble into the chamber, it falls inside these different chambers, the dog has to interact, work, knock it around to gain access to the kibble and have it fall out. So those are just two food dispensing toys. Twist and Treat is along the same lines, it's just shaped in a saucer. And the idea here is we can increase or decrease the difficulty by either screwing it down tighter or making it a little bit looser for those newbies who are just learning how to hunt for their food.
And you can use any type of treats. I know that a lot of these companies now come out with specific treats for their...
They do, and I think it depends on the type of food and kibble that you're feeding as to whether it's going to work for that toy. But in the case of the Twist and Treat, you just may not be able to screw it all the way down. I haven't had that as a problem, and I'll even take these with my own dogs, and I'll use butternut squash or even sweet potatoes. I'll create a little layer and then throw my kibble on top so it sticks. And again, we're just trying to make it a little bit more difficult so that they have more time playing with their toys.
Now, do you have many, and I see you even get a puzzle.
Yeah, puzzles are new too in the last 5
How do
10
they
years. Same idea. You've got little components to it where you can pull up one of the caps, put a treat or a kibble in one of them, put them all down, lay it on the floor, let your dog go crazy, let them just figure out which one holds that little magical treat. We've learned so much about dogs in the last 20 years, John, it's amazing, but they've found that they're incredibly intelligent, equivalent to a 2-year-old. So, you know, we really want to stimulate the mind and the body, not just the, you know, the basic exercise, but let's get these guys thinking. And you'll find, I've had a student actually go home and say, my dog is exhausted after this nose work stuff. And I said, yeah, they really have to think and work, even though they're not exerting a lot of physical energy.
So we know the equipment's changed, the toys have changed, and you've even started, we addressed a little bit earlier when we're talking about equipment, that even training has changed.
Definitely,
in,
definitely.
In a long way as well. Are there any other topics or subjects in relations to that do you want to talk about?
I think the big thing that I'm challenged with a lot of my students and clients is they're still kind of caught up in this dominance theory that we used to use as our model from
Roll 'em
25 years
over,
ago.
yeah. The
But
alpha roll, right?
The alpha roll is just one of those techniques. I think even just the theory of the dominance theory and how we have to, you know, assert ourselves physically over our dogs, it's really been debunked in the last 20 years. You know, we've done some long-term studies on dogs and dog packs, so we've learned that there are some differences between them and wolves. And even that original wolf study that they did that kind of got us thinking this dominance and hierarchy theory, it was really a tainted study to begin with because it wasn't a true wolf pack. A wolf pack is a mother and a father and its siblings. These were unrelated adults that were put into an enclosed space, and then food's placed in there, and they watched some brutal fights, and then they modeled everything about our dogs after that. So we've learned a lot more. We realized, okay, that's not really correct in the theory. So The alpha rolls, and some of my students, thank goodness, don't even know what that is. This is a technique that was originally brought up by the monks in New Skeet, where we kind of grab the dog by the scruff and roll him to the floor, or pin him, or keep him down until they calm down or submitted. But honestly, there are a lot of dogs that are so fearful that doing
dangerous.
this, could actually make your dog more fearful of you. I had a student many, many years ago who contacted me. I shouldn't say she was a student. She was somebody that reached out to me, and she had been going to another trainer, and she had done this, and she was severely bitten by her dog. And you know, the reality is it's not necessary. It can do more harm than good. And I think the theory behind it is tainted too, in the sense that it's not the higher up who's pinning the other individual. It's the individual choosing to lay down, to stop whatever's happening. So there's a big difference there between being forced to do something and choosing to do it on your own. So that's one of the things, is getting away from the dominance theory. What we have learned, stress, layered stress, over-arousal, the heightened level of stimulation is really what leads to a lot of our dog bites in our country. So if we look at a problem, I always look at what kind of stress is this dog under. Is this a nervous, anxious dog to begin with? And then everything else is kind of snowballing up. One of the first things we do is try to alleviate and lower the dog's stress levels. This is why dogs often react in the holidays, because there is a lot of stress. There's a lot of different components during that time.
Now, a big part of your job, especially for Berkshire Humane Society and the community, is to handle these phone calls. So when these phone calls come into the shelter, we always filter them to your phone. So is this one of the common things, this is one of the more common things that you're seeing when people are calling up, the issues they're having?
I'd say some of the most common things are jumping on people, coming when called, and leash manners. Again, all can be addressed in a level 1 manners class. One of the most commonly private lessons that I see is reactivity. And reactivity is the dog who goes out on the walks. Unfortunately, he sees things in the environment. It's often other dogs, which is why Duncan is around, or people in some cases. And the dogs just go, basically they start barking and lunging. And the owner's impression is he's dominant and he's aggressing. Well, he is aggressing, but it's based almost always out of fear and anxiety. So we do a treatment that's totally different than correcting the dog, because if the dog is already afraid and we start correcting him, we're just going to make the fears worse. So
that makes a lot of sense.
It does,
but
when
I
you
think
think about
when
it.
when you're dealing with a situation, I think that's sometimes very hard to see.
Yeah, and it snowballs to the owner. The owner starts to get apprehensive. Uh-oh, we're out on a walk, I see a dog, my dog's gonna act up. So, what we try to do is give the owner some basic control and communication, so they have some tools in their toolbox. And then we have to start the process of counter-conditioning and desensitizing. We want to teach that dog that dogs in the environment, or even people, if it's people-related, it doesn't mean it's bad. We want to turn it around and try to impress on the dog, when you see another dog, good things are going to happen to you. And that's why we want to get away from some of the corrections. It just adds more bad stuff to that whole scene that's already occurring.
Is there any correlation to what you're talking about right now in separation anxiety?
Well, reactivity is fear and anxiety based, and so is your separation anxiety disorder. It is a completely and totally different behavioral problem. The separation anxiety really is a dog who's having what I would call a panic attack when the owners leave. So it's fear of being left alone. There are some other components to it now that they've addressed, that it can also come from over-attachment to an individual in the household. So sometimes we have to figure out.
Which makes total sense.
Yeah. That's why sometimes these dogs, they'll react when one owner leaves, even if the other owner's in the home, he's still upset and anxious and carrying on, versus it's just about being left altogether. But that's another big problem in our country. They've estimated there are a lot of dogs in the millions that have separation anxiety disorder to some degree. So we got a lot of dogs who are afraid of being home alone.
And I was going to say, I'm not in the shelter every day, and I don't work with the dogs on a daily basis, but I see more issues, it seems, with even some of the dogs we're getting in having that separation anxiety issue. A lot of people treat them with drugs. Is that?
That's sometimes part of the program. I look at everything and I tell my clients, you're not going to find that magic wand. And it's often not one thing that you do, it's the series of different things that we put together. So it's the pieces of the puzzle working together that's going to help this dog. Oftentimes with separation anxiety disorder, it is a long-term thing. Not only do we want to treat the dog and get the dog to the point where it can stay home alone for a short period of time and be okay, But these guys can revert back very easily if something traumatic again happens, or just if all of a sudden the owner's schedule goes haywire and he's being left for longer and longer periods and he wasn't
Lack
acclimated.
of exercise play into this?
Exercise is good for all dogs,
Right.
whether they're that rowdy canine who's got pent-up energy, or it is that nervous dog who can't handle being home alone. It's just like with humans. You go to your doctor and you say, I'm feeling kind of bad and I'm anxious and I'm depressed and I don't sleep well. What do they say? Exercise. 30 minutes of sustained, vigorous exercise is our goal. It releases endorphins. Endorphins are your mood stabilizers, so it's going to help not only the human, but the dog as well.
We could go on and talk about different subjects with this all day long, but we're just about out of time. But Lisa, if you could give your contact information, so if any of our viewers out there have any issues with their canines or just have a question for Lisa, how can they get a hold of you, Lisa?
Sure, John. My number at the shelter is 447-7878, extension 39. They can also email me at lcorbett@berkshirehumane.org.
And you're not there 24/7.
I am not.
But you will return their call
Absolutely.
or their email as well.
Love to hear from them.
Well, Lisa, thank you for joining us today. I think we had a ton of great information, a lot of great products out there. And hopefully everybody will tune in next time for Purr Wag Adopt. Thanks for watching.